This is the second of the American Association of Patent Judges Oral History Project video. The project seeks to capture the history of the USPTO's patent boards through the recollections of the board's members and employees. We are pleased to have John Witherspoon to share his memories of his time as an examiner-in-chief and member of the Board of Appeals. That board was a predecessor to both the Board of Patent Appeals and Interferences and the Patent Trial and Appeal Board. Okay, let me get started then.
Sure.
All right. When were you a member of the Board of Appeals?
From the spring of '71 until the fall of '78.
So a little bit over 6 years. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's about 7.5.
Yeah.
It's 6.5.
Well, tell us a little bit about your background and what made you a good candidate for the board.
Well, I did not apply. I never now said I'm a good candidate. Commissioner Bill Schafer asked me if I would serve. He wanted to broaden the base of experience of the members of the board. Up until that time, going back to the days of Abraham Lincoln, I think everybody had come up through ranks. So I thought about it for a long time, every year, I think. And finally told Bill that would be good. I think I could provide some good public service. So nobody from the White House or the Commerce Department came by to talk to me. I think I had one visitor, and that was an FBI person. But Bill took that and went up through Commerce and then on to the White House. I did not, it was my call to testify on the Hill. I forget who mentioned me in the congressional record. But so, you know, the question really should go to Bill. He's now deceased. But he had known me for a while. He knew I had clerked for Judge Ridge. And he knew I had gone to Georgetown. I don't know if that was a matter or not, but he was close to Georgetown Law School. And had been in private practice for a few years. Done a lot of prosecution work. But I think broadly, you know, it strikes me, I've seen so many commissioners, it strikes me that most of them come in with a bit of an agenda for certain things they'd like to do or not do. And this was one of the things that Bill wanted to do, to broaden the base of experience. So I was the first, but a number of others followed. See, in those days, there was a limit by statute of 15. We were known as examiners in chief. And I'm looking to you, but I know you know everything I'm saying. So I'm not telling you anything. But they're all presidential appointees. And was the custom, when there's a change in administration, presidential appointees, I believe, across the government, submitted their resignations as a matter of course. And then the White House decides which ones to pick up and which ones not. And historically, I believe it's fair to say almost completely, Board of Appeals examiners in chief, the letters of resignation were never picked up. But there were 6 picked up when Nixon came in. And they were all very, very senior people on the board. I don't think anybody got hurt badly financially, but I'm not sure of that. But one was Pat Federico, who became a dear friend of mine. I'll talk about that a little later. I feel like real training patent law was Pat Federico and Giles Rich. They are the 2 mentors. So, and of course, they didn't agree on a lot of things. That made it fun for me. It's sometimes going down the Patrick office route. He and none of the six liked the fact that there were going to be 6 vacancies on the board. And Pat, was very involved in the what was the first big international treaty? The patent cooperation treaty.
Yeah.
He was very involved in that. And when it got signed, there was a big reception at the State Department. And Pat was invited, and I went through the reception line. I didn't see this, well, this is hearsay, but I love it, so I'm telling you. Marie Stans was the commissioner,
I
or
remember.
the secretary at the time.
Yeah.
And apparently Stan said to Pat, when Pat came along, "Good to see you." And Pat said, "Oh, that's interesting, considering that you just fired me last week." Did you know Pat?
Yeah, I met him once. I think when I was in the Patent Academy, he came down and talked to us. It was 1970.
No, board members came on board. Every now and then, all the former board members came around from time to time to have lunch or visit. Pat always stopped into my office, and we had all kinds of discussions about patent law, of course, not baseball.
Right.
But in those days, of course, he puffed on his pipe or cigar, smoked up, filled the room with smoke. But he, I found him very enjoyable to talk with and learn from.
He was one of the principal drafters of Section 103, the revision to Section 103, wasn't he?
Correct. He apparently, the committee on the Hill was going through all the titles, and they came up to Title 35, and the key person up there said, "What are we going to?" I think he told Rich or somebody, "What are we going to do about this Title 35?" Nobody up there knew much about it. Apparently, Bob Watson, the commissioner at the time, agreed to let someone from the patent office help him. And Federico was the designee. I understand he was told that to make clear these were his views, not the patent office views that he was expressing during the meetings on the Hill. So, and Pat was going through the whole title to help. Rich was focused primarily on getting rid of the old requirement for invention, the so-called third requirement.
Right.
And he and Pat worked out the language for 103. But I view Rich being and Pat being co-drafters of 103, with Rich probably having a little more input. But they worked together, I think, very closely.
So when you came to the patent office from outside, from being a practicing patent attorney. So how did it strike you now coming into a government office? And what was it like to, what was your office like? What was your, the staffing like? Was a lot different than you would expected or had hoped for?
And that was pretty much like expected. I had not been in. I don't think I've been in any of their offices. I might have been. But it was pretty much what I expected. I think I shared a secretary with Sauce next door.
Yeah, I think it was Mary Ann Volkmar.
May have been.
Because that's where I think I first met her.
Well, there was an older lady who did most of my work. We get into the ex parte Haas case. I think of her because I revised my dissent about a dozen times. Actually, so it created their time. marked it up, passed the sheet, this was back, this was back.
Right.
You know, like, people use carbon paper. And all those good things. And I could see you getting kind of disgusted with me. Why can't you make up your mind what you want to say?
So did you handwrite all your?
Yeah.
And did you
Well,
dictate it?
first.
Right.
You, that was another thing, by the way, the Bill Schuyler Institute, Bill Buckford idea. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
But he was the commissioner at the time, right?
Yeah. Yeah, he was a commissioner when I came in. I remember one time, I guess I shouldn't be telling stories, but I remember coming one time and I was going to search, and he had been the week before, he had been the commissioner of patents. And the next week he's in the search room going through patents in the shoes.
After he had resigned.
Yeah, after he had resigned. I think he was back in the law firm. And I don't know if there was Schuyler Banner Birch then, or if it was something else before then.
But he, you know, he resigned, in a rather unpleasant circumstances, because he did not want the Benson case to go to the Supreme Court. He thought the CCPA had it correct. You youngsters, that's the early computer program.
Yeah, Gottschalk for Benson. Right.
The IBM had a big role in that. General counsel, Nicholas Katzenbach, had been the attorney general. And had a lot of buddies back in the Justice Department. He and they, I'm not going to point to any particular person, but anyway, the case, Schuyler argued adamantly, Secretary of Commerce did not take it up. And I believe he told me once that where he stands agreed with him, that justice overruled, because as you know,
Yeah.
They're both top dog on decisions like that. But Schuyler resigned in protest. So that started the Supreme Court down a long history of dabbling in patents. Dabbling. I repeat that, dabbling. And we're now hopefully going to get a little bit straightened out. You know more than I do, but I keep reading on IPA, and you might know that Judge Michelle was
Pushing hard.
pushing hard and with some success.
Yeah,
He's been
yeah,
pushing hard,
yeah.
some success with Steve. But you know, Judge Rich once told me this. Law cases, patent cases should be kept away from the Supreme Court. I guess it shows that.
Yeah.
Justice Brennan did not want the court to take, according to his former law, one of his former law judges. Tax cases and patent cases, Brennan thought courts should stay out of it. Anyway, here I am.
Right. No, this is good.
Off track again.
Okay, let's get back. We'll get back.
We're government live. You mean 5 p.m. or 5 a.m.
As long as you and the batteries hold out.
Okay.
Okay, how did the
I was gonna answer your question.
yes.
You know, Schuyler-
Other than I went in and I knew who he was. He didn't know me. I was just an examiner, and relatively new one, I think, at the time. And I saw him in there. I recognized him, and I said, I was in there, I was standing there, and he was going through patents in the shoes like we used to do. And I said, "Weren't you the commissioner last week?" And he said, "Yes, I was."
Well, his mother was his stenographer. She used to let her fellow stenographers know who she was. It was good.
So now let's go back to you being at the board. And how did they assign panels, and how did a panel decide the authorship of an opinion when you decide an appeal?
The clerk kept track of, first of all, there was the 3 boards really.
Right.
Chemical, electrical, mechanical.
Right.
In my case, it's 99% chemical. And within each group, the clerk kept track of how many cases the board members were assigned, the rankings. I don't know what formulas she used, but every now and then, a bunch of files were brought in. No computers in those states, you understand. And these are all cases that I was number one on. We were ranked 1, 2, and 3.
Right.
I understand it still goes, it used to for a long time. And the number one person was responsible for working up the case by going first to number 2 and consulting them. And the two of them would reach a decision. If it was in agreement, then the number one person wrote up the opinion and circulated it. That was the first time the number 3 person weighed in. Now I'm talking about non-oral argument cases. And so the number 3 person, the file and the opinion, and either signed off or went back. Now this gives me an opportunity to tell a story. You asked about when I went on the board and the office space. How about the people? I was the first, and I was blocking a position from somebody from within the ranks. I felt that. I knew that, and I completely have sympathy for that. And most board members accepted me well, welcomingly, but there were exceptions to that. And one of the exceptions came into my room that first day of reporting to work, stood right in front of my desk and said, "You have no business being here." Well, anyway, that person was the author of an opinion. And he and the number 2 person were going to reverse. One of the reasons I was not had no business being there, because I was just going to be the mouthpiece of the American Patent Law Association, now the American Intellectual Property. That's just private practice. I don't know anything about examining. And they were going to reverse, and I picked it up and I went through it, and I found in the art what this person missed. So I went with the file to this person's office and said, "I don't think I can sign on this," and I explained why. To his credit, he picked it up and agreed with me and rewrote it. But I got up there really good tonight out of that. I was just going to be a baby or so. He was reversing it. Said, "No, this is the interference."
So how often did you sit on panels where there was people from different disciplines? You were mostly chemical.
Right, I would say 98% of my cases I worked on were chemical. That was the largest docket at the board. Again, thanks to Rich Federico. The law tended to be a bit unstable, and we got lots of appeals therefore.
So they,
Federico, by the way, was on the way to lunch one day, and Federico said, "John, I found another phony affidavit."
so there just weren't many panels that were really mixed, where you might have a mechanical and electrical joined together, or chemical and mechanical.
Right.
Okay. You already explained how you guys went about deciding appeals. Was there anything, any type of formalities and for opinions or hearings that the board had to cling to, that you had to do certain things a
No,
particular way?
I didn't feel bound to do anything other than write a good opinion, reach a good decision, write a good opinion.
And the style and the approach was totally up to you, up to your decision when you wrote it.
Yeah, but I think most board members follow pretty much the same thing in terms of the formatting of an opinion we're talking about.
Yeah.
So the
So,
way I told you about the brief cases, when the cases to be heard, we all got copies of certain documents from the main file, the briefs, the art. And I guess that was about it. So when we went into the hearing, we were all pretty prepared, pretty well prepared. There was not a 1, 2, 3 type thing. The number one person, well, I guess more senior person on the whole panel was presided. You asked for some stories there. There's one attorney argued, kept getting a lot of questions from the board about this and that and the other thing. He got so frustrated not being able to answer our questions, he said he was going to refile the case and folded his paper to more that. Did you ever treat an attorney like that? No, you don't have to answer it.
did I ever make untoward comments to an attorney during a hearing?
Well, we know
Yeah, I
you did
didn't.
that that's part of the game.
Yeah, I did.
But this is not critical. It's just saying, where's that? What's this?
Right.
You guys couldn't answer it. I don't know why it showed up. Don't you get a beat?
How often did they have expanded panels when you were on the board?
Not very often. I would say probably less than 10% at the time. But a 5-judge panel, 5-member panel was a typical expanded panel. I don't recall anything between that and the big 15-member panel. But en bloc, it was really en bloc. Everybody, all 15 members. By the way, you only find 14 members here. I don't know. Somebody's missing. That was the Haas case.
Mhm.
Maybe familiar with.
Yeah, I remember it.
Whether they had jurisdiction to hear the case where you're trying to divide the claim up into parts. Was that a restriction requirement that needed to be petitioned, or was that a substantive rejection that could be appealed to the board? George Ramey was chairman and decided this was warranted since it was a question of the jurisdiction of the board. That everybody on the board should have a say, opportunity to say. There were, I think, a 9-member majority opinion saying it's not reviewable by the board. And there were maybe 3 dissenting opinions, and in part, and 1 dissenting opinion in whole. I think that's 15, maybe not. That was a lot of fun. As you might imagine, it would bring a lot of their opinions.
When the board did an expanded panel, whether it be 5 or 15, were they considered binding precedent, for example, on other board members or on the examining corps?
Well, I don't recall being involved in the matter of binding precedential or not precedential. That I think is something that few people have come along with after AIA started adopting some of the practices of the Federal Circuit. I assume I would never talk to anybody about it, but yeah, you know how that happened better than I did. We've always thought opinions were binding. Now, typically they were not published.
Yeah, it was.
Although, the board members explained to me that you had to be careful in writing a dissent. If you dissented from the other board members, it's more likely to get published. The applicant can ask for it to be published.
Right.
But if it's unanimous, it's not so likely. This was not good. In that sense, I guess it was binding.
Did the board have any control over what was published? I mean, the applicant could always have the
Not to my
decision.
knowledge, although conceivably there were situations where the board maybe went to the attorney and said, we'd like to have it published. Do you agree? But that would have been very rare. But otherwise, it was still, the whole file, the whole proceeding was subject to the confidentiality provisions of the rules. So the board couldn't send it off to BNA for publication without permission.
Right. You mentioned that there were 15 board members when you got there. There were also
Not when I got there, but soon after.
okay.
There were, I think,
Right.
at the time, as low as 9.
Yeah. Well, there had to be 9 because Nixon dispensed with 6.
By the
So
way, we were known as Nixonites.
good for you.
But and the president, that's the same person who came into my office the first day. He coined that word.
Yeah.
There were several, Saul Sirota, Paul Heenan, and I think Fred Matter. Yeah, that soon got filled. Well, I was not a lone wolf very long, but I mean, the worst credential, you asked me why I was appointed, but you didn't ask me about my worst credentials. For some of my board colleagues that I had took for Judge Rich. And I was a member of the APLA. How low can you get to find somebody to serve on the board?
Well, there was 9 of you when you got there, and then soon there were 15.
I recall 9. Yeah, that
Right.
sounds about right. Yeah.
But then there was also the statute provided for acting examiners and chief.
Correct.
And how did you guys work with the actings?
I did well with them. There were some very good people, and as you know, some of them then became
members. Yeah, because they were all selected from the examining corps.
Right, for 6 months periods, right, as I recall. Right, the detail for 6 months, then maybe got renewed. But yeah, I found some of the acting board members to be quite qualified.
Did people usually treat them the same as that's presidentials and give them credit and?
Yeah. I didn't make a big deal out of the presidential things. Well, some people might have. That's just the way things had to be worked out to get on. To be appointed.
Tell me a little bit about law clerks.
They were wonderful.
Well, let's say some were wonderful. Did all the members, did everybody have,
Except Herb Lidoff, who was a very rapid worker. And he felt clerks got in his way.
it slowed him down?
Yeah, so he was. I think if there were others, I think, for various reasons, I think maybe there weren't. But, there were quite a few.
I knew Rodney Bennett.
Oh, he was another guy appointed as a Nixonite. Rod Bennett. Well,
He was a,
electrical and you're chemical.
well, I was out of the security group.
Okay.
And when I got to know him, he was the SPE of the electrical art unit in the security group. So I got to know Rod pretty well.
Well, I did too. I liked him a lot.
Yeah, he was funny. Yeah, I thought he was a funny guy.
Sirota and Rod Bennett. Although some not, but I liked him a lot.
So how did the board members get along with the agency heads? For example, the statutory members of the board, you had the commissioner and the deputy commissioner and 2 assistant commissioners who were statutory members of the board.
I'm not sure I ever served on a panel with any of them. May have. But is that what you meant by how do we get along?
Yeah, how did you get along? Did they did they, how often did they sit on panels, if at all?
Well, they did. some big cases, like the Alapat case. Which was a case that ended up with a panel that was stacked. Harry Manheck didn't like the way the three panels came down. So, are you familiar with this at all?
Yeah, I was at the solicitor's office.
Okay. You're not. And then it went to the CCBA, and in my opinion, it was not Judge Rich's finest moment. And the people were delighted, I suppose. No, depends. That's going, maybe.
If you're management or not management.
I did not like that setup. I mean, we're supposed to have a board of appeals to review the decisions of examiners working for the commissioner, working under the commissioner. And now we're gonna have the commissioner reviewing itself. In effect, by stacking the board with
Yeah.
the people.
And the court said, he
That's
can do
okay.
that, it's perfectly okay.
I don't know, the board was supposed to be basically independent of the examining court, but Rich didn't see it that way. By the way, you mentioned that how people viewed about being a presidential appointee. There were a couple of people who took that pretty seriously and felt that they had superior authority in certain issues over the commission.
Yeah, I had heard that some would say, I was appointed by the president. The president is my boss, not you, Chief Judge.
Well, you use an expression there that triggers a thought. I said something about that boss, Rich, was in his home, I think, immediately corrected me. He is not your boss. Your boss is the people of the United States. You don't work for the president, you work for the people. Typical Rich.
Yeah. While you're there were two separate boards. You mentioned two separate boards, the Board of Appeals and the Board of Interferences. Now, I don't think the Board of Interferences were not presidential
They were
appointees.
appointed by the commission.
Are you familiar at all with the differences between the boards and practices or anything?
Well, yeah, to some extent. I mean, I knew a lot of people on the Board of Interferences, Herb McGill, Saul Sirota, and Gordon Milestone, Wally Modance. The first three that I mentioned eventually went to the Board of Appeals. But of course, they're deciding different issues.
Right.
The ex-party versus the inter-parties. There were some interaction in the sense of who goes first. I mean, does the Board of Interferences only decide cases involving applications or patent on application that the Board of Appeals had reversed an examiner on? In other words, do you determine patentability first or priority first? And there are a couple of situations where the case got bounced back and forth, as I recall. I don't have a very vivid recollection of the details, but there was that interaction from time to time. But
And I think that was one of the reasons they decided to combine the boards to avoid that. And they changed the law so and interferences you could consider patentability.
Don Quigg, I think, commission behind that. And now, I haven't been not too familiar with proceedings since '78, but I had a sense in hearing some people talk that you still have two parts to the board. Is that true? It is the Board of Patent Appeals and Interferences, but Aren't there sort of two parts to it? With the judges being in one or the other?
Well, that was going to be my question. Did you ever, for example, did any of the Board of Appeals judges ever sit on an interference panel? Well, I'll tell you, we used to do that when
When you were on the Board of Patent Appeals?
when we were on when the boards were combined.
Oh,
When I got to the board, when they were combined, then yeah, you're one board, you pretty much had a group of people who specialized in interference work and people who specialized in appeals, but sometimes depending on the subject matter, you might have a subject matter expert on that.
I can understand that.
And we would do that.
That's one advantage of having a board
yeah, and
interact.
And that continues to today, but we're now the patent trial and appeal board, right? So there's a trial side
Right.
and the
appeal side.
and they do cross pollinate, but for the most part, they stay on each other's side of the street.
You've mentioned some cases. Are there any particularly memorable cases that come to mind? I mean, you mentioned Haas and you mentioned Allopat and
I was not involved in Allopat, but I was one of the dissenters in Haas. Mangan, what was his first name? Chemical guy. Very, very good.
Philip.
Career examiner.
Phil Mankin.
Phil, you got it. I should be interviewing you.
No, I have a cheat sheet.
You came in with some homework.
Yeah, I
Did you
decided.
have a lot for that?
Yeah, me.
Yeah. So, yeah, and I think, is there anything more about the Haas case that we need to talk about? It had to do with route of review. Was
Right.
this an appealable substantive
Right,
issue,
or
was it a
petitionable.
petitionable?
Yeah,
Petition had been taken.
Yeah.
But anyway, attorney took the appeal. Interesting case. I mean, dividing a claim up into its parts. Are you restricting or are you
right.
objecting to the statutory 112? I can think of the old one, renumbered now, 112 second paragraph. I think I was particularly pointing out this thing,
Right.
saying what the applicant regards as his invention. I regard as the invention of these three things right here. No, we can't examine all that stuff. It goes one thing, and I can appreciate that. It creates examining problems. Do not allow some breakup. Some of these Marcuse claims, get pretty weird.
Yep.
And but CCPA said, well, you're right. You've heard of Marcuse.
You sat on a case with the then Commissioner Bob Sloper.
Yeah. And
Which was about an improper market.
yeah,
Well, that's another issue.
right, but it all came out of the same idea because there were probably, yeah, I think I started to multiply everything out. And I think when I got over 55 million, I said, well, I don't have to go any further. They were there, if you put all the permutations of combinations that were in there. So, but that didn't go anywhere.
Well, thanks to the Haas case, you mean?
Well, that of course was argued in the case because, well, right, because it was, I asked you about contact with the heads of the agency. Well, I think who was the deputy commissioner, Bob, when
No, he was commissioner at the time.
he was acting
Chief
commissioner.
Judge Schwab. It was those two guys.
Yeah, they came together and they wanted to do something about these because the groups were the tech center directors were complaining about the problems of having these monstrous.
Is this still a problem today?
Oh, I'm sure it's still causing that problem. We didn't resolve anything.
You retired instead.
Yeah.
Well, there was another case that I was thinking of this the other day, what I might come up with in response to that point. case that went to the CCPA, which I had, I think, dissented. And we got reversed with reasoning. But it's a very simple blend of three polymers. We call them A, B, and C. And the claim called for a range for A, and a range for B, and a range for C. And if you took the upper limit of A and B, there was nothing left. You was over 100%, no place for C. That made the claim indefinite, right? Well, I said, in effect, I didn't use these words, but it's use of common sense. People would understand if it said you have A and B and C, you don't put it. You leave room for all three. There should be some for all three. It says something about that which cannot exist is neither an anticipation or an infringement. I mean, this is like, I'm gonna search this thing about something that doesn't exist. Anyway, that was kind of a fun case. I can't recall any others. Something's nagging me in the back of my mind to go ahead.
Well, did you enjoy your time at the board? Did you like being a
Well,
member of the board?
I enjoyed some of the time, but a lot of it I found pretty routine. And I decided I'd like to do something else. But I mean, the Haas case I loved, and that case I kind of liked. Something that challenged me more than just reading the references and applying. Because that's all we did, ex parte. We
Yeah.
looked at any interferences.
Well, I guess I'd just like to thank you for participating in the AAPJ's project on the history. Appreciate it very much.
You're very welcome. I'm honored to have been asked to reflect back after you've been away from something for 50 years. You've forgotten more than you can even try to remember, let alone remember. But it's interesting how I'm talking to you guys like your college students, but I know you're out of college. It's interesting how at age 90 or before, you know, you have time to meditate a little bit and ideas pop into your mind. 1 hour I'm thinking about patent office. And, I mean, I'm still reading the write-ups about what's going on in the field. I've stopped reading decisions of the Board of Appeals. Now, I misused the word there. I said decisions. Judge Rich was strong in the distinction between decisions and opinions. I've stopped reading the opinions. But nobody follows that anymore. Everything's a decision.
I learned that lesson, not the hard way,
You did?
but I was in the solicitor's office and, I'd go in and listen to the arguments before mine. And Judge Rich was on the panel and he made that very clear to one of the counsel. And I said, oh, I'm going to remember that.
When you were before him.
Yeah, particularly.
I think he tended to go to extremes sometimes. And as the practice, if you will, to call these things decisions, let's get on board and call them decisions. But anyway, the appeals were from decisions.
Yes.
The opening part of our,
Right.
I tried to, having talked at the little circuit, you talked about the formatting, I tried to kind of follow that. Instead of saying this is an appeal from, since this appeal is from, we are an appellate court, people already know it's an appeal, you don't have to say this is an appeal. Another idiosyncrasy. And I used to do that. It makes sense. This appeal is from.
Right.
Gee, I know later I'm going to think of something I wish I had told you. But that's the best history I can think of at the moment.
No, this is great.
Really, I love the patent office. I love the patent system. Patent office. Although, and the way things have changed over the last 40 or 50 years in terms of the attitude. I mean, back when I got into the field in the 60s, it was an us and them type thing. And the Bar Association, be leery of, because they're representing inventors, examining courts, something else. And I sense that to a very large extent that is a thing of the past. There's more interaction and not see. You still have two different jobs, patent office and practitioners, but they're all trying to work more together. Am I off base?
Well, we're sort of forced together, I think, because, for example, the advisory commission or committee,
Okay,
they all are almost all from the bar groups and represent the bar
okay.
pretty much. So they're right there giving advice to the head of the agency. I don't know. I never personally felt that. It may have been, at least I can't remember it. It may have been because of you. And when I first started to work for you, you said, well, we look at the merits of the case. That's what we decide. We don't look at personalities. We don't look at the quality of what was written or the quality, if the examiner has the art and has the right rejection.
That's a good point. I thought examiners, I was not in administration in the patent office, but if what I heard was true, that sort of scorecards were kept from examiners, won and lost records at the board. I can think of cases where examiners did a great job in presenting their arguments on part, but the argument we didn't think was strong enough. But to me, that examiner did a good job. On the other hand, there are cases where there was good art and not very well presented. So I guess that's just inevitable.
Yeah.
You have to have some kind of a measuring stick for success at the board.
I was a supervisor. I was an SPA for a while. And I did not keep
Okay,
a record. If when I review how the examiner did in the year, I'd look at the examiner's answer. If an opinion came down, usually it wasn't in the same year, but
yeah,
so it didn't matter. But I'd look at it when it came down and have a meeting with the examiner if I thought it was necessary. But usually it was, well, what did the examiner say was the most important thing, as opposed to what the board had to say, or as far as whether it was affirmed or reversed. It was just, like you just said, did they do a good job? Could they have done better? Was there something else they could have pointed out? We might have that discussion one-on-one, but it really didn't go into, a record of.
you're in discussion between board members.
No, this was when I was an SPE.
Oh,
So this was me and the
examiner.
examiner
Got it.
talking about his stuff, but I never kept a chart, and there was no official. There was a lot of computer record keeping that was done, and I don't remember that the Board of Appeals record showed up on the information you got, because you got one every bi-week, and then you got a roll up for every quarter, and then a roll up for the entire year.
Well, I'd have to ask my colleagues, I guess, about how well I did, but I was not a big producer, I tell you that. And I suppose that was known by a lot of people. I felt I did a good job. And at least I tried to. And good law clerks. What other law clerks did you remember? What, Bill Hoffman, Jim Hoffman, does that name ring?
No, Bill Smith.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I think he preceded me.
Smith, he and Mary Ann, were related. You meant Faulkner,
Um,
I think.
well, Bill Smith, who then moved on and he became a member of the board. Al Smith, one of the tech center directors. I think Mary Ann was married to his son.
Okay.
So I think that might have been the connection. I wasn't aware of that, Mary Ann and Bill Smith. Brooks Hunt, do you remember that name?
Yes.
Yeah, he came out of the same unit I did. Brooks' real skill, he was good at what he did. His real skill became being a supervisor and handling people.
Oh,
Yeah, he became quite good at that. Bill Solomon,
yes, certainly.
I think these were all around the time and all were my contemporaries when I was an examiner. And SPA.
Those are names of people I probably wouldn't. I would have trouble remembering, but since you mentioned that, they come back.
Yeah.
So, some of them became members of the board, some did not. I used to get a call from a judge on the federal circuit. They were CCPA days. Or I guess maybe to get my opinion about somebody who's clerking when he applied for a clerkship at CCPA and who had worked at the board. I don't really recall anybody asking about you.
I think Bill Solomon did, and he got a clerkship, I think.
You're right.
I think I remember reading that, and then he went off and can't remember which firm he went off to after.
By the way, how is the new director working out, if you're able to say? Or
Well, we're all former employees,
yeah,
so he's open game.
She seems to have a very large.
She,
social
that's right.
media. She has a very large social media presence. They're always posting every day.
oh really? Now she is a former clerk at the federal circuit. Did you know that? I forget who, and her time there, I believe, overlapped with the chief judge, Kimberly Moore. So, well, I mentioned Pat. I actually better read this. I got that on the record.
Yeah, that's great. Are there any other colleagues, any other stories about people you worked with when you were at the board? You mentioned, I guess, Sorota or Sturgeon or any of those.
Brazil was one of my favorites.
What's up?
He just passed away a couple of years ago at age 98. And I believe they told me when I went to the show that I was the only person from the patent office who had come to pay the respects. But a lot of his colleagues were deceased. So I mean, I was 39 when I was appointed, and her was probably late in the 50s. So he was a principal guy.
Yeah, he was really good. I liked him from getting to know him just from that short time that I was clerk to the board.
I thought all the people on the board of review, board of interferences that I mentioned were good people.
I can go through my list these were all the people that term overlapped your term.
Oh, good.
Okay, so the top of the list is Herb McGill, Herb Lidoff.
Okay. They were probably two senior people.
Yeah.
When I went on.
Arthur Behrens.
I liked Arthur. By the way, Arthur was a tremendous writer. And Joe Schimmel was a tremendous lawyer all around, particularly in court. And I thought from the two of them, when I was at the CCPA, and I see a brief came in from the patent office that had Schimmel and Behrens both on it. It's a dynamic duo. The writing and the oral argument, two of them and a good team. What else?
Phil Mangan, we mentioned, right? Fred Strader,
Oh, yeah, I was trying to remember. He's an electrical guy. I think he's one person in here I couldn't remember. Maybe he's on the front row there. They won't take away. Fred Strader. No, that's not Fred. Go ahead.
Don Andrews,
That's Don Andrews.
George Korecki. Gorecki, Goreck.
What's the name? You're on the board when I was there.
At least that's the information I need.
Okay.
AAPJ has a website and they list all the board members from the beginning
I see.
and by the date, their start date. And so I went through it and checked all the ones that overlapped with you. George Roaming, you mentioned, Luttrell Parker,
Great guy.
Fred Mattern,
Yeah. Parker was a kind of he was a smart guy in many respects, including how to deal with people. He came to my office once and felt I had said something in a footnote that was not very helpful. I was going to invite some feedback, recommend, but take it out, which I did. That's the kind of guy. Did you know him?
yes. Well, he was in the solicitor's office for a while,
Right.
then he was commissioner for a while.
At least deputy.
Yeah, at least deputy, yeah, and I think acting commissioner for a while,
Could
maybe.
be. Could be.
We've
had a lot of them.
Yeah. We mentioned Mattern, Salsa Rhoda.
Yep.
John Schneider.
Yeah.
I think his son, isn't his son is on the board now,
Really?
yeah.
Well. He's gonna be here. I technically, I guess. Snyder preceded me on the board, but he came from the commissioner's office. Which he came to from private practice. But I don't think Bill Scudder was very happy with him. Put on the board. Or in a sense, he was the first person from, but not directly from the private practice. He's the guy who in front.
Brett Sturdivant, she was, I think, the first woman on the board.
Could be.
Uh,
She was from Olive Oak. Right.
yeah, I think that's right. John Lieb, Lieb.
The name's familiar. He may be the missing person here. This picture's kind of dated because I don't see McGill. Well, yeah, I do see McGill, but I don't see Behrens and I don't see Little. They may have retired by this time. There's one person missing, maybe me. I think, yeah, he came from the outside. From Alice Chalmers, I think.
Rod Bennett. Roger Campbell.
Yeah. Picture Roger Campbell. I keep wavering when there's one person at the desk in front.
I can't remember what he looks like. He was the tech center director when I started as an examiner
Oh,
in the security room.
oh. You started, and you, what were you before you went to security? Did you go directly in?
Yeah, I went right in as a new hire.
Did you?
Yeah.
And where had you been working?
I had worked, I just finished graduate school, but in between graduate school and undergraduate, I worked for IBM as an engineer. Walter Burns,
Yes.
electrical, I think.
Yes. He's Oh, here he is, very back. He's a very modest guy. Is that it? That's it?
Now, Paul Heenan,
Oh, yes.
Mrs. Merker, Evelyn Merker, Gordon Milestone.
This is state of age.
I know, but she used to call me when I was in the solicitor's office and have some questions when I guess she'd left the office and was in private practice. And she would,
He came from Syntax Corporation.
Yeah.
To that house.
and then I think she left the patent office and was working with a firm.
Could be.
And since she knew me from clerking, she used to call me and then she'd have questions. And we always had the policy of try to answer, the questions.
You mean Miss, not Miss.
I thought it was Mrs. Merker.
You guys understand what I'm getting at?
Oh, Ms.
Yeah.
Ms.
Yeah.
versus Mrs. No, I'm sorry, she was always Mrs. Merker to me. When I was working at the board, she was Mrs. Merker. And when she'd call and she'd call me and I go, oh, Mrs. Merker, how are you? Because, well, that was how I knew her. She was staying that way.
Right,
Gordon Milestone,
yeah,
Richard Spencer.
yeah, that's a name I hadn't thought about. Richard Spencer. I sort of forgotten, yeah.
I know he was there when you were because
Yes.
when the desk I was in, there was a phone. But the number on that phone was the same as his. So if one of my friends said, hey, can we do lunch? He'd pick up the phone. And he was not pleased.
Spencer, did he come from any?
I don't know.
I don't recall having any real, I don't think any cases with his on. I don't see anybody in their response to that name.
And then David Wilimowski.
Oh, yeah. Hey,
And then the last one is Don Messenheimer.
yeah. Didn't interact with him much either.
He might have been mechanical. For some reason.
He was.
That's what it's like.
So Wilimowski. Very pleasant guy. Did you know him?
No, not really.
West Virginia. He's gonna retire someday and move back to West Virginia. And Herb McGill said, no, Bill, don't forget, when you move away from someplace for a long time, when you go back, it's not the same. That's what you left it. That happened to any of you people. Have you thought about going home?
Yeah, Philadelphia is nothing like.
Well, I'm out of Chicago,
Well, that's why I hired you.
but maybe.
I didn't hire you. I just said I'm not.
Well, I grew up on the north side of the city, originally around Western and Devon. And then we moved out to the northern suburbs.
You've heard of Elmhurst.
Of course.
I used to teach there. That was my first career.
Could you tell us a bit about that? I think we kind of skipped over your background.
Okay, well, I grew up in Illinois on a farm, grain farm, about 100 miles south of Chicago. I went to the local grade school, which consisted of 2 rooms. Went to a high school, which consisted of about 50 students. There were 6 students in my high school graduating class. And I was one of 6 children, 4th of the 6. My parents, very unusual, though they were quote farmers, they both had a college education. And all 6 of us knew from the day we were born, we were going to college. My father and mother were very limited income, put us all through college. I mean, we had, oldest brother was in GI Bill. I helped. My sister took a year off and worked for AO. And in any event, during that time, I was appointed to West Point and lasted 90 days because they spotted a problem with my back. I have a condition called spondylolisthesis, the fifth vertebrae. Regulation of the opposite, I could not get a commission with that condition, so I was sent home. So I went back to school, got a graduate degree, and then taught at York High School in Elmhurst. And but being a good suburban school, I was expected to get a master's degree, which I did by going to summer school and high school. Then I decided I would like to get a master's degree in the field that I wanted to get one. That's why I went back full time. Got a master's degree in chemistry, so I have 2 masters. Then my advisor wanted me to go ahead and get a PhD, but I told him I didn't think I was cut out for that chemical research. But I did want to combine my education in chemistry with something. A lot of people were getting MBAs. I thought, going to law school, becoming a patent lawyer was appealing. So that's what I did. That's when I moved to Washington. But that's not true. I first felt what this advisor said. I'm writing a book on gas chromatography. Steve Dellinger is with DuPont. I know they take summer students, interns. I'll talk to Steve. This was February. We'll talk to Steve. Maybe they can take you now, and you can decide whether you want to go to law school or go to come back and get a PhD. And decided to go to law school, so I transferred to the legal department of the DuPont company and moved from Wilmington to Washington and enrolled in law school and went to night school. And that was my first taste of patent law. It's searching and the head of the DuPont patent group in Wilmington was a good friend of Dante Moore. Does that name mean anything? Dante Moore was, I believe, the solicitor at one time. And the patent office offered the preliminary level of patent training for new examiners. I forget what it was called, but some outside people were allowed to enroll in that course. And I and some of my colleagues were allowed to take that course. I'm trying to remember the name of the guy who taught it. It's very interesting. So that was my first introduction to patent law. I was doing prosecution work. I took the agent's exam while I was in law school, did prosecution work. My wife and I were going to go to the Wilmington. We had looked for housing up there until the clerkship came along, Judge Rich. And that changed the course of my life, really. Because my wife really got the job for me. I don't know if you've read a paper I wrote a few years ago called Tribute to Judge Rich. It's published in the JPTOS. First paper in the volume 100. Alex Sophocles. You know him?
Sophocles, Mike Sophocles' son, I think.
Correct. I have this on the board of interferences.
Right.
And Alex, the paper was the paper that I read to the Charles Rich American in Court. And it was published by the George Mason, I should say, Antonin Scalia Law School. You can understand, you understand. There's a lot of money given to the law school, you know, okay. So it's a no-no over there, don't say Antonin Scalia. But anyway. I had lunch with the dean yesterday, by the way, and he was telling me how many Supreme Court justices have been teaching, or had taught over the years at Mason, including Kagan, which surprised me. Thomas, Kavanaugh. Of course. Anyway, I'm getting old. So, what was I talking about?
You're talking about getting your clerkship,
Oh, yeah, right. Clerkship,
how your wife actually is the one who got it for you.
you got it. And in this paper, I talked quite a lot about, I recommend it, by the way, Derek, Rich. And there was going to be an inter-court meeting dedicated to him. And I was asked to speak, but I didn't give a speech. I read a hypothetical letter that I wrote to Judge Rich's mother, explaining to her what was going to go on, and then I was going to be speaking. And here's what I plan to say, Mrs. Rich. And in that letter, I explained that I was going to tell the group about her, Mrs. Rich, Judge Rich's mother, and what an influence she was on him. And also I was going to mention that Judge Rich talked about the three women in his life. First was his mother, and another was his first wife, who died during the marriage after 27 years. And the third was his current wife, then current. And that he said that these three women filled the gaps in his education to make him into what he is now. He'd gone to Harvard, went to Columbia Law School, but these women filled the gaps. I thought, so I think that speaks well about his character. Okay. And earlier in this talk, explaining it during my interview with Judge Rich, he asked a lot of questions about my wife. I thought, what? She's not applying for the job. Why are you asking me all these questions? But then later in my paper, and I explained that he said these were these three women, there were gaps in his life. And then I saw the puzzle was solved. He was trying to find out about my wife.